So, continuing from part five of the GP crash course. So, because there is a huge bias against people who supposedly can't succeed in terms of academics because they are deemed to be of later status, uh, who are ultimately not earning a decently high amount of income. And so, if you look at it in this sense, even in terms of the system itself, a lot of the disadvantaged children are marginalized because, especially a lot of, let's say, ADHD patients, they are unable to concentrate, and they may be really smart, but they may not be uh, everything, and maybe it's only for one subject. Okay, so basically, you have to argue about how the initiatives are very short term and there's a lot of bias against these people in the first place. And so it's difficult to make it very inclusive. And at the same time, it doesn't seem like it's going that way because, the economic growth, especially in Singapore, is supposed to be constant constantly increasing, like every single year. And so, because the government emphasizes this so much, there is very little emphasis on really looking at the humanistic side of society, which is obviously to help others and to make societies more equal. And so, now I'm going to go into the conclusion. Uh, it is more important to concentrate on your body rather than stealing a few minutes to finish the conclusion. Why? Because it doesn't really contribute so much to the overall quality of the essay. And here you just lay down all your points and connect them together rather than looking at them separately. And this is also something that you can do in the introduction if you want to. But again, like what I said, it's very important to give the background information and give like a rough idea of what aspects you're going to cover. So the introduction and the conclusion are not too different. It's just that the conclusion is more concise. Now, you need to be able to show intelligence and something that you couldn't have written prior to junior college. Now, I think this is something that it's important to take note of because it's easy to write a secondary school essay at a JC level, but it's not easy to write a JC level essay when you're in JC because you are still a bit confused about certain materials and sometimes your teacher sucks pretty much. So it makes it hard for you to find some sort of inspiration because everything is all about grades and A levels. So I understand because I went through the same thing. Now that's why I will give you more tips as we go along. But basically, the conclusion isn't really that important. So I'm going to go into some more exam skills that I haven't highlighted too much during this course. Now, while we wait for the slide to change, basically the most important exam skill is picking the easiest question. Now, this sounds like a really dumb technique, but it's actually very important. Now, especially now you're in J2, you should know how difficult it is to pick a question that you're able to score in. Now, it is subjective, of course, like what it means by easy, because everybody has different skills. But basically, you need to choose something that you do not feel very strongly for. Now, this is because subconsciously you will be rather biased in your answer, and you won't give a more objective viewpoint on the other side of the coin. Now, this can severely affect your grades, and so it is better to remain neutral on the issue you're writing on. Moreover, do not do questions such as the ones I've written on the slide. Now, A-level questions are getting more broad in terms of spectrum, but also more specific on some issues, like such as the beauty of math. I think it was either on the 2010 or 2000, I think it was 2010 um, or 2009. Now, it's basically about the beauty of mathematics, and if you read Chaos Bowl, which is from Raffles, JC, and they compile like a list of essays from RJC, you begin to realize that yes, you are competing with very, very good students. And the thing is that actually KS Bowl is not a collection of their best essays. This means that there are a lot more people who are better able than you in doing well. Now, in this crash course, of course, I want you to get an A, but for some of you who may still be getting S or U in your mid years, it's very important to know that it doesn't you don't necessarily need to get an A in GP unless you want to get into law and medicine. Now, why do I say this? You need to be very practical now because you are going to be near your A levels, and there are also other subjects that you need to focus on. Unless you are really, really good in your other subjects and you only suck at GP. Now, and even for the next few months, the only thing that you can do is obviously, I will give you more tips as I go along here. But basically, you need to enjoy learning it, right? Now, okay, I'm going to elaborate more on the questions that I have told you you shouldn't be doing and the ones who are on the slide. Now, if you look at the first one, it's about how science never solves a problem without creating 10 more. Now, this is a very broad question, and it's problematic because there are too many branches of science you have to talk about, which will result in a better essay than many of your geeky counterparts who obviously know a lot more about science. Now, if you if you know the website I fucking love science, well, it's something like that. And so the blogger basically covers about a lot of things like astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, and they all have to be discussed. Why? Because they're very essential to science, and they are a very important part of it. You can't just focus on one aspect because then you will lose out to somebody who talks about more things because there will definitely be some people who are really good at everything. Now you can't compete with these people. Now, and another thing is you have to know about contemporary scientists who are influential enough to change the landscape, such as those researching on stem cells to cure cancer, or those who are involved in genetic engineering in order to remove sickness and create humans with better genes to be healthier and more attractive. Now, this probably hasn't happened in a large scale, but a lot of people are not able to choose what gender their child is, and also probably some of the genes. And so maybe you want to remove something so that the child doesn't have some illnesses. So you also have to link the possible cure to cancer, which is associated to a major problem, as it is the first leading cause of death in the world, claiming lives of 8.2 million people in 2012. Now, to the problems associated with the good intentions of helping people. Now, at times, biological technology requires a lot of resources, and many people who require basic assistance in healthcare will be neglected. And I think this is especially true because there are so many resources, there are so few resources that we have. And so, like, let's say the Nepal earthquake recently, of course, there are so many people who require basic assistance in healthcare. Now, who is more important? The people who have cancer, which obviously most are those who eat a lot of fast food and those who come from developed countries, or let's say people who need these basic assistance in healthcare, like let's say just basic medicine, because a lot of them are injured because of the earthquake. Now, cancer patients don't have access, who don't have resources, sorry, also won't have access to the treatment anyway. So it's all about people who are rich because in developed countries, not everybody is rich either. So there will also be patents, sorry, involved, which makes it more complicated for people to copy and bring this kind of technology to save more people's lives, especially in many developing countries where they need it the most. And I think this is more applicable to not cancer, but AIDS, because there are so many people suffering from it, and not everybody is getting the treatment because it's extremely expensive. Now, the conclusion of my explanation about this question is that it's not easy to do this, and I think it's better if you don't uh, do a question that is too broad to the point where it's like, phrased as science, because there are so many aspects of it. And you definitely need to be better than everybody else, at least in the top 10% in order to get A. So it's not easy. Now, the second question is about whether violence is ever justified. This is tricky because it's a philosophical and a moral question. Now, it's very subjective and hard to argue for or against. Now, moral standards are always blurred when it comes to politics, and so you have to link various cases such as rape, murder, and assassinations. Now, for example, in Singapore, people who possess a certain amount of drugs will get the death penalty. Is this really necessary considering that only some types of drugs are addictive and will be dangerous in the long run, such as LSD? Of course, the government doesn't want to take the risk, and so imposes a violent punishment in order to deter people from dealing drugs and possessing it. Now, however, is this against human rights? What are the universal human rights anyway, right? So the right to live may be argued to be inapplicable for terrorists or others who murder for their pleasure and twisted goals, as others have to suffer because of them. Now, furthermore, is it ethical to cane somebody who's young? Because this is also violent, right? Now, why do we need to severely punish them when it doesn't solve the problem? Because the problem may come in the form of their family issues and it has nothing to do with school. Now, negative reinforcement should be lessened in severity, at least in my perspective, because that's at least in happening in a lot of Asian societies, with more positive ones, such as rewarding people who do follow the rules. Maybe this is a better way to incentivize people not to do like some certain things, right? So violence is always maybe to a certain extent, like a bit of it is necessary, but after that, it's intolerable because it's not easy to deal with the consequences of violence, especially when you're young, right? So as I summarize some of the things you may want to think of for this question, it's obvious that that despite being complex and interesting, it's not a question that you want to do in the A levels. Now, the third one is also ambiguous. Now, it's about whether humor can ever be serious. It's complex because of the level, depends on the level of seriousness that one expects it to be. It can be both serious and funny with very deep levels of meaning, like black comedy or satire, that bring some issues into light, and so they're important. On the other hand, some types of humor can be serious, but the intended meaning may be for entertainment purposes in order to make it more lighthearted. Now, does it make it less serious if it's more humorous? Now, this is why the definition has to be very clear, because you need to see whether both being serious and lighthearted are they mutually exclusive, right? So because if it's ever serious, of course it's obvious that the answer is yes. But how serious is it in the long run as a consequence of the joke? Because maybe the joke is intended to hurt people or uh, like just for entertainment, so it doesn't make it less serious, right? So now I'm gonna talk about the fourth question, which is about taking risks. Now, it is essential part of life and should be encouraged. Now, the word risk is very broad, which is good as it allows you to expand your ideas. However, the main issue with it is that there may be insufficient raw data that can support your arguments unless you are very familiar with the topic. This is why social questions are the best to do and the easiest because there is so much data on poverty and other similar issues. So it's easy to score at the A levels because the markers really love data. However, risk taking may not be documented because it is up to the person to view it whether as a challenging risk or as something normal that he feels will not result in any form of loss. Now, it'll be good if you have some experience with the stock exchange market if you really want to do this question, as the markets will be impressed by the depth of your knowledge on how to view stocks and whether to invest in them. And because most people in JC, they haven't done it yet. There are some, of course, but most of them don't. So this goes the same for real estate. So give something that is more mature if you really want to attempt this question. So there are a lot of different kinds of questions that are too focused on jargon. Like let's say it's too focused on biology, or like it's too, like I said, it's too philosophical. So unless you are like a ninja or you are really really good at what you do, and you can basically sneak in a lot of important information and demonstrate to your marker that these are important, then I suggest you don't do the question because it's not easy to score, because the point is for you to score in the A levels. That's why in JC it's also cool if you're able to experiment with a lot of the questions, and then afterwards you see whether you're good at it. Because when it's gonna when I had to undergo prelims, like in J2, it was actually the point of time when I realized that I really like social questions and I can do very well at it. So anyway, let's move on to the next slide. I've explained about the structure and reasoning behind the structure because every school is different. So I'm not going to talk so much about this. You can look at this slide. The crucial issue is to be able to give two counter arguments and rebut them with two very, very strong arguments. Now, even if you don't have your third argument, it doesn't really matter. It's very optional. At least your body is finished and you have a strong essay. Now I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Okay, so as you have seen from the way I explained some issues, you might have realized that I really, really, really like current affairs. Now, as an art student in JC as well, I didn't like GP classes because they were mundane and they didn't make me think. Now, this is why you need to push yourself further because this will become the basis of your performance in university and even in your job or when you want to open your own business. And so writing skills are necessary and very, very important, regardless like which industry you actually are in, because you still have to, present yourself and write proposals and all that stuff. So the main thing, like what I say, is to integrate a lot of different aspects of the world and mix them together because now in this kind of society, economy and society, it's very hard to look at just one sector in itself. So it's good to specialize in something that you really love, but also you need to look at everything in a broader context. Okay. Now, yes, in the slide, it's basically about my background and how uh, I like to analyze things, and it's because of the minor and the major that I'm in. So this is again something that I want to highlight because you may not necessarily agree with whatever I say, but I have gotten a B and I have made my students get A before. So I hope that this is enough substantive so that you will listen to whatever I say and really look into how you can apply my techniques into your essay so that perhaps you can even get an A in your A levels if you're really good. Now, a lot of people always ask me this question: what is the best way to learn GP, and how did you manage to do it? I've never really memorized essays from broader perspective and all that stuff. I really love the magazine, but this doesn't mean that I really believe in like memorizing essays. And like, while everybody finds GP really boring, like I always take the time to have fun while doing it by watching movies and also reading books. So these are very important if we have actually done a course on GP ever since you're in J1. I would have or the beginning of J2, I would have definitely used this technique because this is a lot more interesting. Now, I'll give you an example of a movie that's really good, which will be useful when evaluating certain social questions. It's about the idea of the American dream and how it's distorted, as materialistic pursuits don't exactly lead to happiness. Now, when you watch American Beauty, which is the scene starring Kevin Spacey is on the left, and read up on data about happiness levels in the States, the proponent of this idea, now you'll realize that many people may be financially wealthy, but at the same time depressed because they lack connection with other people. Because the American dream is very individualistic. It doesn't regard what consequences people's actions have towards others. It only talks about like, the corporate ladder and how you should be better off than everybody else and having a decent family, two kids and one wife. Now, poverty exists everywhere. It's not about money, but it's also the fact that our minds are impoverished. Um, we do not, and this is something that I heard from like Chan Chun Singh, our minister. Now, we do not fill our minds with enough creativity and desire to help others, and instead only think of ourselves. Now, this is something that you also want to think of because I think social questions are interesting because it also makes you think about what you can do in order to help, right? So it's not only theoretical. Now, as a literature student, I also love reading books, and I think it's important to read the thought-provoking ones. Like, of course, you can have guilty pleasure, right? You can read like Fifty Shades of Grey or Twilight, whatever you want, but it's important to look at the significance of a lot of these books. Okay, so I personally love science fiction. So even though I am not a scientific person at all, it's because the materials push the boundaries of what mankind can achieve, and to me this is exciting. So obviously this is also about like Avengers, like fantasy, and um, like Star Wars, Interstellar, Star Trek. All of these, they're very, very interesting because they're not something that you see now, but it may be like that in the future. Fast cars, even the empathy machine in the book where you want to feel something because you are so numb, it's all really, really cool. Now, if you're not a fiction addict like me, nonfiction is even better for GP because you need real stories and data to score well. Like let's say you want to have a read the autobiography of like not only Bill Gates, like Steve Jobs, or let's say you like Robert Kiyosaki and Warren Buffett. Those are also good. You can read the cash flow concept by Robert Kiyosaki because it talks about the importance of doing business. Now, the nonfiction side is just to get you thinking deeper about the issues and possible ramifications of some trends and policies. And the fiction and the so basically the nonfiction and the fictional books, they basically combine together and they integrate into creating a more solid mind about something. So you shouldn't only read either one of them because both of them are equally important. Okay, so this is the next slide. And so I've already talked a lot about paper one, and but I also want to talk about paper two. Now, I can't elaborate much on this, and when you sign up for the crash course, I'll talk more about it. But basically, some of the major hints will be already taught in school. Now, finding the right clues before, in, and after the sentence is very important in order to correctly answer your comprehension question. Nevertheless, be very careful when identifying what the author really means, as he can be sarcastic or condescending in his tone, and so it's not literal. Now, and especially some of the times, the author does it per paragraph, so you should also look at what the next paragraph has to say. Just skim very, very quickly. It's important to read newspapers as a result because there's no shortcut, and you really need to be accustomed to the language. And each passage will be different, but they will be talking about current affairs and social issues. And so if you are acquainted with a lot of them, it will be easier for you to look at various arguments about the issue. Now, also, you definitely then this means that you will learn the skills as you go through a lot of the practice papers. Okay. Next slide. Now I'm going to talk a bit more about summary. Now, as we all know, we need to paraphrase the passage. Now, this requires a high level of awareness of how English grammar works. Now, you need to learn how to be able to change the structure of the sentence and paraphrase specific words that are easier to change. So, for example, change can be paraphrased to transform or alter. Now, let me also give you an example here, which I'm also showing on the slide. Like, let's say in here, despite the fact that Israel has a very high level of military capability, blah, 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 blah. Now, if you look at the summary that I've highlighted to you, sorry about this. Okay. Now, many people have the misperception. Now, the misperception will basically paraphrase despite the fact that, right? Because it's about two contrasting things. Now, that Israel is reliant, which is a paraphrase of dependent on the United States funding, which is also a paraphrase of aid for its superior defense system. Now, it doesn't have to be like 100% accurate, but it has to be very similar to the intended meaning. Okay. Now, okay, let me move on to the next slide. I will be talking a bit more about AQ here. A lot of people, I realize, struggle with AQ precisely because they don't have the analytical skills and rehash whatever the author has stated. Therefore, as I have pointed out earlier, it is crucial to be able to link the author's arguments to bigger issues. For example, if the topic is on food, you can talk about how it does not only impact the environment, but also a whole community. This is because large companies own seeds for many types of crops, especially genetically modified ones. As a result, many farmers are unable to pay for the high prices of the seeds that are patented. As climate change causes many harvests to fail, many people are driven to desperation and even suicide because of the debt they owe. This particular incident happened in India because of Monsanto's huge influence over the country's agriculture industry. Thus, you should link whatever the author says to social, ethical, and health issues rather than just focusing on saying that the author's arguments is valid or invalid because of the reasons that he has already provided in the passage. Talk about something completely different, but still has a strong link to the topic given in the passage. So let's say if it already talks about agricultural stuff, you can talk about ecotourism because that's pretty interesting, right? So another important aspect of an A grade answer is Also one that does not necessarily contain many points that are evaluated. Evaluation takes a lot of effort and time, and so it's okay if you are only doing it for 2 points. A counter argument is also not very necessary unless you have the time to do so. This is because you have to argue for your case rather than being more balanced like in a compo. So this is the difference as well, even though the analytical skills are the same. Furthermore, you can always insert snippets of how you agree with some parts of the author's view inside your answer anyway. So as what your teachers have probably told you, it is better to disagree with the author because you will have more things to write about, and your answer will definitely be more intelligent because you don't just agree, right? Now, I want to look at the 2011 AQ, which is what I did for my own A levels. So it's important to have a small introduction, quote unquote, where you have 1 to 2 sentences stating why you agree or disagree with the author. Then jump to the next paragraph where you talk about the specific reasons why you do so. For example, if the question asks about the functions of green spaces in cities, explain why they're good. It's because the government wants the people to be refreshed, but for work the next day. Now, this may be a political controversial statement, but in a way, it's true that many things we do are geared towards the purpose of work and contribution to economic growth for the government's sake. So now, you know by now that I come from a political science background, so my angle is in from that point of view. But if you look at it, it's something that you won't you are not learning in JC, and this is something that I think is a very good value addedness to your answer, and the marker will be impressed because you are thinking beyond what you're expected, and perhaps that's also the reason why you will get an A. Now, okay, let me move on to the next slide. So now, basically, I think to sum up whatever the crash course has done, I'm really sorry if I repeat myself sometimes because, but I think this is important because this is a crash course. So I need to rehash whatever important skills that you need. Do things because you love them, and I think don't do this like after this crash course. Do well in GP, but also don't be too discouraged. I mean, you will definitely be discouraged if you don't do well, but don't be too stressed about it because make sure at the very minimum that you can enter a local university. That's very important, especially because it's expensive to go overseas. Um, I think do things because you want to, not because only of grades. And so this will make your learning a lot more interesting. And like I said before, prepare yourself for university because this is going to be like a major jump from JC, right? So um, I hope you love English more as a language, even though, of course, our O level, PSLE O level, and A level system may not necessarily be the most interesting. But seriously, there are a lot of reasons why I think English is such a beautiful language. And so always make sure that you, from now on, you learn GP because it's cool, right? And I hope that whatever I taught you in this crash course has been beneficial. And I'm sorry if the different parts don't integrate together. So hopefully you get a better sense of what GP is all about. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you, and